Hello and welcome to part 4 of my 1UZ 240SX build. Today we're going to be working on the transmission controller harness and the transmission cross member, or at least what I need to do or what I can do prior to the transmission controller getting here. I've ordered it, but it is coming from South Africa, so I don't expect it for a little over a week, but there's a lot of work to do before I can even, it's not just going to plug and play. I'm going to have to run the harness. I think I've changed my mind on how I'm going to run the harness. I didn't really look, and I didn't know the S13 has its own automatic transmission computer, and there's already plugs in the engine bay, and it's already wired through the chassis harness. So I'm going to see if there's enough wires there, if I can use the old transmission harness and then use where the transmission computer is now for the S13, if I can just wire the new transmission controller into that part of the harness and splice and connect both the 1UZ transmission harness and the S13 transmission harness to make it work that way. It would be a lot cleaner, but it may be more of a pain in the butt than it's worth. But I'm going to look at that today, and right now the transmission's just sitting on the cross member. It doesn't line up at all. So we'll look at that and see what I need to buy or what I'm going to do to address that to get it bolted down. Well, it didn't take much to find the transmission computer. I don't know what this one is. I'll look it up because anything I don't need I'll get rid of. But it's hiding right up there. So I'll get it pulled out. Hopefully the harness is long enough I can get the connector down here. I'll count how many pins, see how many wires, and check the diagram to make sure there's not a bunch of stuff teed into it for the rest of the car so I don't cause any other issues. But I don't think it's going to be that complicated, so I'll get it pulled out and we'll look at it. It didn't take very long, and according to the internet, this is the cruise control computer / relay box, which I don't really think I'm going to need. The EMU black has the ability to do drive-by-wire, and I think I'm going to use that. Right now, the 1UZ is actually a drive-by-wire, or at least mine is, the VVTi motor, and I modified it so it works with a regular cable. I tried to use it with the drive-by-wire with the EMU black, and I don't know, I just couldn't get it right. It would just flap around and do weird stuff, but it's the very beginning of drive-by-wire throttle bodies. My plan is later on to adapt it to an LS style drive-by-wire throttle body or something more common that's already been figured out. And when I do that, it's just two inputs into the ECU, and you can do your cruise control, your accelerate, your coast. So I may do that later. One bolt, and I was able to pull, I guess a ETC is what it says on the end of it. ETC, the transmission controller. Harness is right there. It's the one going into the fender. So I'll probably pull the fender back or see if I can get a little more slack to make it easier to work with. I may just pull it through the grommet and work on it outside instead of up onto the dash. Be a little easier. But I'm going to get that pulled out and we'll go from there again. Here's where it comes out at. It just goes up, over, and through that hole up there. Now, I really don't like the placement of it, just because it's, at least without the inner fender well. Eventually I'm going to lower this car and put different wheels on it. But right now, if you lose a tire, it's probably going to take out that harness. If I lower it a good bit, it could scrub and wear through or rip it out. And I may just leave it alone. I may make a guard for it. I had an SC300 that I was able to reroute up top, but it was long enough, and this was further down in that car, and it just came up and over and back through that hole. But this one, the only option that's not just going to be an eyesore or get caught in the hood, it's going to have to be to follow the rest of the harness, which that's a lot of wires. I don't know if I want to do that or if it's even worth doing that. but I'm going to get it the rest of the way out and count the pins and see if it's even going to work at all. This is the speed sensor for the S13, and I've got an idea, but I'm not sure if it's going to work, so we're going to give this a try. It's going to take some testing with a different type of sensor, but I just want to make sure everything still works. And I'm very glad I didn't chop this off. In one of my previous videos I was considering it, or I wasn't sure what it was for. It is for the speed sensor. So we got the battery hooked up. Hope the key's in it. I don't know if you could spin it by hand fast enough, but I'm going to try. Hell yeah. I'm not sure what kind of sensor this is inside of here, but it's only got 2 wires. And this sensor that was inside the transmission, I'm pretty sure has 2 wires. So I'm going to open it up and I'm going to hook it to those 2 wires up front, and I'm going to spin something with the drill and see if this picking up a signal will move the speedometer. And if it does that, I've got another idea. My idea kind of worked, but it's not going to work. I took the sensor out of the transmission and wired it in where the speed sensor goes, and the speedometer does move. I put this on a drill so it'd have what would be 2 teeth, and spun it on the drill, and it'd read about 20 miles an hour with the drill wide open. And if 4 teeth is right, which is what I've read should be right for an S13 speedometer on the output, then that would probably work by the time I had 4 teeth. This only spins, I think it's like 2,000 something RPMs, which would be the equivalent of 2,000 RPMs in 4th gear, which should be straight through, or is at least on a regular manual transmission. And it picks it up, but you have to have it so close. Like it had to be touching, and it would be smacking it. And since I want to run this basically on the output flange of the transmission, I can't have it that close. It can't be touching. Alright, I just don't think it's going to work. Now, my next thought is to get a sensor off of a Ford. Like they use a crank sensor right on the snout, on the dampener. There's a reluctor ring on the dampener, and it's exposed, and it's in engine areas, and then the heat and oil resistant for the most part. And if it fails, the speedometer just doesn't work, so it's not a big deal. So I'm going to try to find one of those. I thought I had one here at my house, but I don't. If the parts store has one cheap, I can try. I'll do that. But that should definitely work, I think. I'm trial and error. I'm just going to have to try it. All that work was a bust. I did get the crank sensor and wired it in, and I spun the piece of metal in front of it with a drill just like I did the other one. And the fastest I got the speedometer to was about 9 miles an hour. And no matter what RPM I spun it, that's all it would get to. I even backed my bike up here and used the teeth used the bolts off the sprocket with it in gear up on a stand. But I figured that'd be spinning fast enough. It should do something different, but it did 9 miles an hour. So I did a little more digging, and the factory speed sensors are, at least in this S13, is a pulse sensor. It's not a variable reluctor. It's not a Hall effect. It sends pulses. And I tried to read that with the multimeter, and you can kind of see it. You really need an oscilloscope, I believe. I don't know that much about that stuff, but I checked my the sensor I got for the Ford crank sensor, and it does not do that. So it's not the right kind of sensor to use. Now, I did more digging online, and when they do that, you have to use a signal converter, and I can do that. I'd rather not add a bunch of little boxes and things to make everything work. But I was doing some more studying, and the EMU Black has speedometer output, so I should be able to drive the speedometer with the computer. And there's an input, a vehicle speed sensor input, so I can use the output shaft speed sensor on the transmission to go to the EMU Black, and then it should drive the speedometer. And we're going to try that, and hopefully that works, because that would be great, because then I could just calibrate it with the computer. I don't have to change number of teeth or worry about the spacing or anything else like that. But the transmission controller is going to be using the same output shaft or speed sensor, so if I have to share the speed sensor for both of those, I don't know what it would do. It might not care. It might just work. They're the same places that makes the speed signal converters. They also make like a VSS, or the speed sensor divider, so you can run two things with the same sensor, and if it does weird stuff, I guess I'll just have to do that. I could mount another sensor on the back of it, but I think it'd be better, safer, and more consistent to get a signal divider. But until then, I'm just going to wire the two into one and see what happens. I mean, I'm sure it'll let me know real quick if it's not going to work. But I'm going to wire that into the computer, or the speed sensor into the computer, and we'll try it. I tried wiring it into the ECU, and the ECU picks up the speed signal, and I can calibrate it so the ECU knows what speed the car is going, and it can do boost by gear and other weird stuff with that. But I'm not running turbo or anything. I might put a blower on it eventually, but not anytime soon. But I took the wires out and hooked them straight into the connector for the speedo. And it kind of works. But it reads way faster than it should. I did some more playing with the factory sensor. I hooked it back up to the multimeter, and I hooked it up to AC, and I spun it with a drill, and it creates AC current. So it is an AC generator, and I took it apart to see what it looked like, and it kind of looks like a tiny alternator. So whenever I wired in this new sensor, or just wired it straight in, it's working. I guess a VR sensor will generate AC current. And I guess when I was doing it the other way, with just two teeth, it doesn't create enough current to actually do anything. But now it's creating too much because of the amount of teeth. So I'm going to try to put a resistor in and see if that works. I don't know much or anything about AC stuff. DC, put a resistor in, it knocks down the voltage. That's simple. I'm going to try it with AC and see if that works. I'm going to go down the road. Tires are very sketchy, but I'm going to go down the road and with the GPS going, tell me what speed I'm going so I can see how far off it is. And then I can just add some resistors that I have just to see if it changes at all. And if it does, then I'll just have to calibrate it that way. But it should work. I tried and tried and tried with the resistors and had no luck. I think that with the VR sensor, it's counting the frequency, it's not counting the actual voltage, so the resistor did nothing. But then, doing some studying, the S13 has this adjustment. Now, my speedometer's showing like 100 miles an hour at like 35, so I don't know if this is going to be anywhere near enough adjustment to make mine right. I may end up having to buy something, some kind of speedometer converter box, fancy thing, but I'm going to try this, and I really hope it works. In order to not have to take the cluster apart 1,000 times, I modified this because with it together you can't get to that adjustment. So I cut that down. I gotta clean it up a little more. It wasn't actually holding anything. It just kind of, it sits right here and kind of helps locate this. And then I drilled a hole so that when this is in there, you really can't see it, but when this is in there, I can get a screwdriver in there and adjust it without having to disassemble everything every time. Well, I hope this is going to be enough. I got it so I can adjust it. Let's see, we're doing what? We're doing about 37. I can crank this down, and that's as far as it goes. 37 to 22. We're still in second gear, so I highly doubt that's right, but I'm going to go down the road and see how far off it is now. I'm not sure how that adjustment works. Maybe that part is just a potentiometer. I could check it with the multimeter, and I could see where it's at and maybe add to it to try to drop it down even further. But at this point, I don't know. All I can do is try it. I've tried so many things. Quite frustrating. It's a lot better, but now the signal needs split in half. We're doing 20 at 40, 25 at 50, doing 10 miles an hour. When it says 20 miles an hour, it's almost directly double the actual speed. Alright, here we go. I really need to straighten the steering wheel. It's about 35. About, that'll do it. 38. I've gone round and round trying to figure this out. I finally got it. I don't really understand how or why it works, but I figured out what to change, and it works now. So I'm going to take the cluster apart so I can get a better shot of what I did. So if anyone else is trying to do this or swap another transmission or another engine into their 240 or their S13, they know at least where to start. So they don't have to do all the guesswork I did and all the things I tried. They can just go straight to it. To get the speedometer out, just flip this over. Just take this out and take these 4 screws and it'll fall out of there. It's important to make sure you don't lose these, because the bolts or the little screws that hold it in also connect the circuit to the speedometer. So without all of them in, it's not going to work. Hopefully this thing will quit trying to zoom in and out. But there's the potentiometer. Just behind it, you can kind of see resistor. Let's see, you can barely see it. There we go, right there, right in the center, right behind it. And if we flip this over, the resistor on the other side is a 27,000 ohm resistor. This is a 9.6 something like that thousand ohm, so it's less than half of what that one was. And for whatever reason, if you the more resistance, the faster the speedometer goes, which I thought would be the other way, but it's not. So once I put this in, it dropped it down low enough that I could then crank up the potentiometer to put it within range, and that worked. So if you're doing this and you have that kind of problem, this is it. I would like to get one of those solder suckers and pop this out of here and just put this in where the old one was, but this isn't going to move around. It's in the cluster, so I'm just going to leave it like this. If it stops working and changes, I'll redo it, but for now it's fine. This is the end of part 4. I didn't do as much as I wanted to. I wanted to get to the transmission crossmember. I wanted to get into more of other things, but the speedometer kicked my butt enough, so hopefully it helps someone else who might be doing something similar. Like, you don't have to put any aftermarket speedometer in to make it work. You can make it all work, and I think it's a lot better than taking it out and putting some universal gauges in. It's all OEM. It looks nice. Some people don't agree, but that's for them. But thank you for watching.